not to kind of buy the rent. So it's middle. Check the wildfire map today for that one.
When Johnny said he needed an awesome new professional
Bringing this meeting to order. This is the Policy Review Committee on Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. And we'll move right into new business. 2.1, Outdoor Water Use Policy. And Ms. Brick, I'll have you give the staff report. Oh, I'll even help you give the staff report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first policy for discussion tonight is the Outdoor Water Use Policy. This policy was first adopted in 1998 and has been amended several times over the years. Before I go any further, I just want to recognize that we had some preliminary feedback and made changes to tables 1.2 and 1.3, which regulate the lawn sprinkling days, and to table 2.1, which to allow hand watering and drip irrigation for vegetable gardens, as this will increase food security. The revised policy has been circulated on table for your reference. You have those in front of you, and it is available for members of the public at the table here, but we don't have any members of the public here. But it is available, and our website will be updated with those changes. Water use policies are common across BC and promote conservation and good stewardship of the natural resource. This policy supports the City of Merritt Water Utility Master Plan and the Source Water Protection Plan. As part of drought preparedness, the provincial government recommends that local authorities complete a water supply and demand analysis that would create local drought management plans and have emergency response and contingency plans in place, that we establish water conservation strategies and reduction targets, that municipalities implement water conservation programs and continuously improve water efficiency, that we incorporate water conservation into planning in our daily operations, and that we enforce these water restrictions. To achieve these goals, local governments should also develop bylaws for water conservation, drought management, and emergency and drought preparedness. Here in Merritt, we do have the water usage policy and the water works bylaw, which both work towards these goals. The City of Merritt has been successful in decreasing the consumption rates since 2006 through education and changes in consumption habits. The consumption rates in 2006 were 1,309 litres per person per day. In 2019, that average was down to 742 litres per person per day. However, in 2019, the BC average for water usage was also 503 litres per day. So there's still a difference of 239 litres per person per day. So there is still some work that can be done to achieve the provincial average, and that's where we wish to go. In the summer months, usage rates typically increase significantly, and this is attributed to the increased lawn and garden watering. The changes that are proposed in the policy will further work toward improving good water stewardship by ensuring that the needs of the environment are balanced with the needs of the community, and that the consumption rates are within the boundaries of an overall water usage plan. The proposed changes that are in this policy include the removal of the water restriction dates. So in the old policy, we have May 1st to September 30th as our start and finish date for water restrictions. We're proposing to remove that and instead have water restrictions that will be implemented in accordance with the current drought levels. And the actual on-the-ground conditions is determined by the City of Merritt, which are usually determined in conjunction with the province. In the past, we've had situations such as May 1st where we are facing freshet and possible flooding, but at the same time we would be imposing watering restrictions, which doesn't always make a lot of sense. So that's one of the things that we're proposing to change. We've included tables 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. These tables are the lawn water sprinkling regulations, so it clearly outlines which days water restriction can happen in accordance with the various levels on table 2.0. So it's a very easy way for members of the public to put this up on their fridge and then know exactly what days that they can and can't water and what hours they're available to water. The inclusion of table 2.0 is a new addition to this policy. And this table clearly lays out the levels of response to provide clarity of what restrictions will be in place based on the current level. This table is based on the provincial best practices, but it has been modified to reflect the needs of the City of Merritt, such as at level 5, the proposal to maintain food security by allowing people to continue to water their vegetable gardens by hand or through a direct irrigation system. Also, overall, the wording in the policy has been updated to reflect the best practices, our city bylaws, and they've been clarified to improve understanding. Furthermore, going forward, the city will promote xeriscaping in new developments and encouraging established neighborhoods to incorporate modern practices such as drip irrigation and modified landscaping to reduce water consumption and planting of native flora and fauna. So that's just a quick overview of the revisions to the policy, and I'm available if there's any questions.
I was looking for your report, and then I don't have it on here. It's here, and I didn't get a full copy of it. Is it all is it here?
I have a copy of the full report right
Oh,
here.
good. How come I don't see it? We didn't have it posted on?
It is on the
It's
website.
certainly on the website,
Oh,
Councillor.
website. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm looking at our.
It should be in use like that.
There's a copy just in case.
Yeah, thank you.
No, we're going on our website rather than eScribe, maybe.
Oh, is that right?
It
Oh,
is
okay.
there.
Maybe I'll start looking at that. Yeah. Okay.
It's a password issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand. So the I guess one question I had, Mayor, is the level 1, 2, and 3, and 4. They are set by provincial government province, aren't they? Those drought level readings.
Greg, can you pull up the drought
Yeah.
portal, the provincial drought portal? Yeah, that's correct, but we'll pull it up so you can see it
Okay, yeah.
I
here.
can walk you through what each level means if you like.
I'm not too worried about it. I'm more worried about that's the provincial government. So I have a good understanding too, because there's a certain individual in the community that doesn't seem to really understand this. So these are set by, well, I don't either totally. It's not me. It's not me. So this is set by the provincial government, and then we have to tweak our policy to meet those different levels, right? Because there's a requirement for every level. Is that right? You're going to see it here?
Mr. Smith?
Yeah.
Thank you, Worship, and to Councillor Luck. So what you can see here is the province regularly updates, and you can look at each kind of from May 26th, you can see the update dates. They have it now where it's happening weekly. And so as of August 4th, you look down the way, you can look through all of the different basins are on the left there. And when you get to Nicola and Coldwater River, you can see that since July 22nd or July 21st, through this last round on August 4th, we've been at drought level 4. And so this is kind of a quick snapshot of what's happening in the province, and really highlighting what the various drought levels are in each of these basins. And if you look at it in previous years, oftentimes it isn't quite so dramatic across the province as it is this year. Sometimes it is really, Coldwater River has been one of the anomalies, but you can see that we are definitely not the only folks that are in fairly deep drought this year, with obviously the Kettle Basin there being the first to hit the province's newly formed level 5 classification. So this is, you're absolutely correct that it's provincial experts that are making the determination in terms of drought levels using a variety of factors, but I don't think anybody is probably debating it. We haven't had a whole lot of rain, and things are looking pretty dry out there, and that has impacts on a whole host of things, rivers of course, but we're seeing it on the fire indices side and other areas as well. So.
And from my understanding is having this policy done in this manner and taking the dates away, it gives staff an opportunity to address this a little bit earlier rather than going right into the extreme kind of watering.
For us, a lot of what we've had is people are confused as to what the requirements are, what they can and can't do, not knowing, what the next level is going to look like. And so, as Linda suggested, this is really about trying to provide the information on the front end, and for us to be able to say, okay, as as drought conditions change, what you are going to be able to do for your outdoor watering is also going to change. While again, trying to incentivize those types of practices that are really in harmony with our semi-arid climate. Linda had a great list there. She's talking about promoting xeriscaping and drip irrigation systems. If you wanted to get, outside of the requirements for what days you can and can't do something, drip irrigation systems are an excellent way to go about doing that. They're far lower water use. They're targeted on the particular plants. They don't hit, it's not about spraying water everywhere under the sun. It's much more focused in terms of how that water is delivered. And so we recognize that a lot of those things are going to take time to implement and to have people adopt on their own properties. But as folks do consider landscaping and other outdoor projects as new construction takes place and those projects are landscaped, as the city undertakes projects, we're certainly going to be looking to move towards these models that are, again, I think a little bit closer to in harmony with the environmental conditions that the city experiences.
Absolutely, I like where it's going. And are we, sorry, Merritt,
Go ahead.
are we going to be putting a communication piece together with this thing? Because I think, sorry.
We are being broadcast now.
Sorry. So with this, are we going to put a communication piece together with this? It's going to be very important to try to really clarify that. I guess we're all looking at me here. The piece about, why we're going to this, who sets the levels and how we have to modify our water usage depending on those levels, and a really good piece. And not only that, but the piece about being water wise in our community. So that's all coming to go with this as well.
Hit the nail on the head. We actually just have a communications officer that has just started this week. So that will be one of her.
Is this project number one?
Quite possibly.
Oh, thank you very much. That's awesome. Yeah, because I think that's the biggest challenge out there. People there's so much information, misinformation, indirect, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be really helpful as we move forward. To let people know in the Nicola Valley and Merritt especially that we're not alone on this thing. As you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's almost a dozen communities there that are on level 4 at this particular time, right? And so we're all in this together kind of thing. Excellent.
And one point to add to that as well is ordinarily with policies that come to this committee, and you'll probably see this with the IT ones, is there's a level of comfort in moving them to the next council meeting. But here, whether it happens by way of formal recommendation or something that we would just implement from practice, we know that this is an area of passion for the community, and so absolutely we want to have it talked about, to have it discussed, to have it scrutinized, and I mean, just recognizing that the general principles of trying to have water-wise consumption are really what the aim and goal of the policy is. And if there are refinements that can be made to support that goal, we're totally supportive of it. So I think that it makes good sense, and we would definitely, again, if council wants to formally tell us to have some public consultation prior to bringing this to the public, or to the public at a council meeting, it could happen. Or if you just want us to communicate that, hey, this is something that's going to be on the next council agenda, if you have any comments, feel free to provide your input. We can just kind of have a generic announcement that way.
Thanks. There's a couple of questions I have on the policy itself. One of them is, in the exemptions, we have the city of Merritt will grant exemptions. Can we use that as a main?
I like that too, man.
We can certainly change that.
The other one, and this has nothing against Charlie, but when we talk about, in the opinion of the public works manager, shouldn't it be in the opinion of the CAO?
Sorry, I'm just following along which section we're on there.
I'm sorry, down, anyone watering contrary to the regulations. And at the bottom of that sentence under procedure, it talks about the public works manager being the kind of like the final say on it.
So you'd like that changed to the CAO?
Well, I want CAO shaking his head no.
So the reason is again, it would not happen where it's just one individual making the call. What would generally happen is you are going to have bylaw that is going to be providing some educational information to individuals who are watering contrary to policy. If those individuals kind of choose not to adhere, the final stopgap measure is saying, hey, we're going to turn the water off, and you can pay to have it turned back on once you're ready to comply. And so ordinarily that whole process happens through Public Works, the water on and off. If you would like to change the system, it could be the bylaw enforcement officer, it could be the director of corporate services, it could be the CAO, but again, the idea here is that this is not going to be regularly used. This is the closest thing to an ultimate hammer
and I understand that. I understand that it's you've got a team that's working well, but think about 10 years in the future. Maybe nobody's going to be around here, and maybe we have a different level or different staffing.
I was going to say one other thing to this, sorry to interrupt. This is also consistent with the wording that we actually have in our bylaw for the Waterworks bylaw, where the director of engineering or the public works manager is the one who is able to shut off water if it comes to that point. That's what we've actually got in that bylaw.
Okay.
Realistically, it doesn't get used all that much, so whatever you want us to change it to, I'm okay with. It's not like this is going to add a whole bunch of workload to anybody's plate. If you want it to be CAO, I'm not going to lose sleep over that.
And you're not going to do it without talking to Sean anyways, I would assume, or whoever is in that position. It just, because council has one staff member, that's what I'm looking at, it is one staff member we have.
Sure, that we can make that happen. Can I add one comment about your will versus may change?
Yeah.
So as it was in there, it was if you're in level 3 or lower, it would be granted. The idea is we're trying to move away from discretionary things as much as possible, where you haggle back and forth. So I really do want it to be that if we're at level 3 or lower and you have planted some planted some grass, you needed to water, you can get an exemption. But by the time we hit level 4, it's not going to happen. So this is trying, again, some of the feedback that we had was trying to provide clarity on how people can get exemptions, when I should be, putting in new grass, etc. And so if you're looking at it and you're at drought level 3, and we have been for the last few weeks, and it's mid-July, and you're thinking, should I be putting new grass in right now? This is really a signal that you might want to put some thought around this, because by the time we get to level 4, you're not getting any exemptions, full stop. And it could be May, but then you have to ask a bunch of questions, and what are the subjective criteria that we would be applying as to whether people would or would not be getting exemptions. It could be that you will up to level 2, you may at level 3, and you won't at level 4 and 5. So there's, I think, some fine-tuning around the fringes that probably could happen, and maybe that is a good approach. And so I don't have any problems with you changing it to May. I'm just letting you know why it was will, just trying to provide as much clarity and simplicity to the process as possible.
Well, and sometimes when we're that rigid, there are stories out there that we just don't know about. And I don't know what they could possibly be, but.
Okay, yeah, May is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that then we actually have to look at and assess the merits of each application.
And if it gets out of hand, then we go back to will, or is it?
I mean, sometimes we get 30 or 40 over the course of a year, so we get some, but it's not like a completely unmanageable amount of applications. So almost always for new sod.
And with your explanation, it doesn't. I'm not as fixed on having it made at this point, so an explanation helps. Did we change the timing of the overnight from 12 to 2 a.m.? It used to be any amount of time between midnight and 4 a.m. or 5 a.m.
I think for the automatic sprinklers, we've always encouraged 12 to 2. I'm quite sure that's the case, and then I don't think there's been any changes to the times proposed versus the old model.
I would suggest maybe we get in touch with the landscapers who set these timers for individuals, because I know that my parents was set to 12 to.
Is it midnight to 4?
It is currently midnight to 4 p.m. in the council policy that's standing right now. And then it is 12 to 2 a.m. in the new policy.
Two hours of that time in between there? I mean, I'm not saying.
It's a 2-hour time change.
Shorter period of time.
It's
Yeah.
a shorter period of time overnight by 2 hours.
So, and again, I think that the times can be, there's some flexibility. I can tell you what the concern from some people when we, from those that are mindful of water use when you do this, is that you switch it to 3, from 3 days a week to 2 days a week, and people will just increase the amount of water that they use on the 2 days that they can water. You switch it to 1 day a week, they're going to take all of those 2-hour periods and they're going to water during all of them. You'll drench it once a week and you can still keep things alive quite well. And so there is some degree of, we're asking for people to be mindful of the spirit of the policy and say set it to run between 12 and 2 a.m. Generally speaking, you're running a 15 to 20 minute cycle on each zone, and that's sufficient to give it the water that it needs, and you run a 2-hour cycle and you can get through it. So if it was 12 to 4, if council wanted that, it could happen. It just opens the flexibility.
Is that where we use a lot of our water sources, the overnight watering? Or is that just when we're on restriction?
Consumption's higher during the day. Nighttime is when the reservoirs catch up.
And it's easier to have everyone all at once for the reservoir to catch up?
Yeah.
The automatic sprinklers.
The shorter the duration, the more likelihood the reservoirs will recharge.
And this way it would be easier to enforce if you had to enforce it. Everybody is on
Yeah.
this time frame.
And-
3 a.m. nobody should be watering.
This isn't about hiding anything. I don't think it's going to come as a surprise that we're not going to have people out from 12 to 2 a.m. It's a unionized environment. We have people there's times that you're going to have people working and there's times where you're not. We have absolutely been having checks on the earlier shift. We've had some on the later as well, and so but the 12 to 2 a.m. we're really asking for people to jump on board with what we're trying to accomplish. This isn't going to be about the heavy arm of enforcement.
Okay. On here. These are all good and everything, and I think it's great the way we're going, but I mean, believe it or not, climate change, whatever you want to call it, happening here, and the UN has just come out with their big new report saying we're done anyway. So that report was pretty catastrophic if you listen to it and want to believe it all. But I mean, it is important that we do get all on board with all this watering and everything. And I'm going to sympathize with this. It's hard. I mean, we were doing some watering at level 2, with our gardens, and we got new plans and establishing them. And my wife is out there, on her watering day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. just doing the hand watering and that. It is hard for that. I sympathize with this. It is hard for us to change all these things. But having said that, we do it, and it takes a little bit of time to adjust and everything. But I think it is important. I mean, I don't think, and it's not just me, I don't think, but I think a lot of us understand that there is an endless amount of water there, even though there's lots of ways getting there and having the infrastructure to do it. So I think this is a great policy moving forward, and there's a lot of good things in it. The only thing that, as we talked about already, is that communication piece and teaching, and have somebody working with the public and doing all that. There's some effort's going to take part in a lot of us here to get this going, because I think we've got a mindset that we're moving in I could be wrong, but I think we're moving in a much different direction with this policy and the way things are going. So I think it's really good to see this happening here. Yeah.
With that, can I ask a question of some specifics on the table, Your Worship, just to make sure that Council is comfortable with the proposed approach? So for lawns on the table, level 0, again, this is going to be what's happening anytime outside of whatever the season is. So sometime after freshet, you'll advance to the level 1. And what we're saying is once we hit that level 1 drought level, that's where we would kick into 3 days a week watering. So that would be the same equivalent as what we were doing previously from May till September. I think that when you look at a lot of these, the province doesn't kind of jump on drought monitoring in earnest until June anyways, and so realistically I think it's probably going to be sometime in June most seasons where you jump on with some form of watering restrictions.
So sorry to interrupt, Present, just so I have a good understanding of this. So we got level 0 will happen once all this drought, everything's over, and then we'll be through that through the winter time and everything. Level 1 will kick in when the provincial government now tells us when that, it may be May, it may be June, depends on what kind of a spring we have with lots of water. Is that what I'm understanding? It won't be May 1st, darn, we're on water restrictions.
Correct.
It could be May 15th, 21st, might even be June.
That's right. No time restrictions on it. It's going to be, we're going to always be catering to what the conditions on the ground are.
I like that.
So we're looking at 3 days a week, and that's the table 1.1 that Linda's prepared. Once you get to level 2, you drop to 2 days a week. At level 3, you're down to 1 day a week. And level 4 is where we're saying for lawns that watering wouldn't be permitted. And at level 5, it would also not be permitted. So we're currently in drought level 4, and this is largely what we've been following in existing practice, but formalizing it so the expectation of the public is going to be on board with that as well. This is something that, I mean, obviously we've had a lot of feedback from the public. There's people that vehemently disagree with this as an approach, and I know that there's a lot of care for lawns. There's people that feel like they spend a lot of not just time, but it's money in order to keep lawns green and healthy and weed free, and they have real concern with this. So I don't want to minimize the fact that for some individuals this is a real sacrifice. I also think that it is really important to acknowledge that large open lawn space is probably not the way that we need to be developing our outdoor spaces in order to support mindful water use moving forward. That being said, this is ultimately it's a council policy. This can be adjusted in accordance with what you feel is right, and again, the public comment.
So having said that, Sean, are our measures here in Merritt any more or more draconian than any other community in the province? Like, is it that the people feel, the citizens feel, some of them feel that we're draconian, this is just crazy the way we're doing this, or we're in line with other communities in the province?
What I can say is not all policies look quite like this, because you guys will, maybe you don't know, but the 5-step provincial model was just unveiled this year. And so this is really trying to align exactly with the provincial model, with what this new policy is. And this is similar to what's used in the United States as well. So they've been really trying to standardize their systems too. So I am, every community has some differences depending on, is this reservoir shortage? What does it look like? Again, I think when I have visited the island earlier this year, I was amazed at how early in the season they were at their drought level 3, and they had fairly severe watering restrictions on long before we did. Then you look and compare that to some of, I guess, Merritt and some other communities. There's lots that we're further along on the scale right now in terms of not allowing lawn watering than some other communities are. And so I'm a little bit hesitant to say that there's a standard for communities with this is what's being applied across the board. The provincial drought levels are standard, but what the community response is going to be dependent on, again, council policy, the individual community's water supply, water availability, reservoir levels, storage capacity, all of those local considerations. And so when we were talking about this, and again, we developed this in coordination with the province, with representatives from the Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations. This is what we felt most closely aligned with their objectives for each additional drought level. It aligns with what they're asking of agricultural water users all the way along the spectrum, because they ask for reductions in water use as drought level advances as well. And so I really do want to be clear that this isn't set in stone, the city's response to the provincial drought levels. You have choice over that. This is something that, as we receive community feedback moving forward, can be changed in the future. If there's something that's seen as particularly onerous or problematic, that can be addressed. But I do think it's this is trying to capture what we think the needs on the ground are versus trying to provide clarity and information to the public.
So just a little bit more clarity on that. These levels by the province must mean something, right? They mean something. Level 1 is you can, that kind of thing. Like, so when you get to level 4, they go, or level 5, no more water, period, whatever. They must mean something with the provincial government. They're saying, look at it, where you get to a level 4, there's certain things you have to do. Cut your water consumption by 75 or 50, whatever the number is. So they must mean something. So we best interpret that number, what their response is that, and then we try to tailor our plan to fit what they're requesting at level 4. Is that right?
What they coordinate is level 0 is an emphasis on preparedness. Level 1 is an emphasis on stewardship and voluntary conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Level 2 sees an emphasis on voluntary conservation and curtailing unauthorized use. Level 3 is water suppliers are likely to impose water restrictions. Data collection for regulatory action by the provincial government may start to occur.
Mm-hmm.
At level 4, voluntary measures and increase in watering restrictions, which may be augmented by regulatory action by the provincial government where necessary to reduce water user conflicts or protection of the environment, will start to happen. And regulatory action is possible. At level 5, all efforts should be made to conserve water and protect critical environmental flows, and regulatory action is likely.
So can I just step back to, so level 4, the provincial government could step in. If we're not doing enough, the government, did I hear that correctly? They could step in and say, hey, you're not doing enough, step it up.
Regulatory action is possible at level 4.
So
And I think
this
what
is
we're-
great clarity, actually.
I think what we're looking at is a graduated approach, so that we don't just jump into level 4 and have to do extreme restrictions. We can actually take a little bit at a time.
And having done that, Mayor, we try to avoid level 4, like we don't want to get. So if we do these measures, everybody complies and everything, we may be able to avoid a level 4 too. That this is kind of, is that the way we look at it, or is that possible?
So when they're looking at it, and again,
Yeah.
when we participate in the drought information calls that take place, they look at a whole host of factors. They look at the precipitation that's fallen, they look at aquifer levels, they look at the levels of the river levels, and then they compare those to kind of the annual percentages for where this is, so our percentiles for where these typically are at any given time of year. So, if we're running in the last 30 days, we're at 1% of normal, or in the last, the river flows are running at 5% of normal for this time of year. That's going to trend in a much larger model to say we're probably in a drought level 4 or 5. Whereas if we're at 45% of normal, they're going to say, okay, this might be a drought level 2 type scenario, right? Whereas if you're running at 80% of normal, we may never leave. We're over what we would have during the typical summer months. You might never leave level 1, and so it really is an analysis of conditions on their side and setting it up with what their potential regulatory action could be. If council didn't implement anything and just said, hey, we're not going to have any watering restrictions, what would happen is at some point the province is going to say, hey, we're going to put you under an order, and then it's not going to be voluntary anymore. This is what your water use is going to be, because all of our water comes from water licenses with the province. So we have, for example, groundwater license applications in right now. Historically, we've just been operating under surface water licenses, and so this is something that we have worked with in conjunction with them to make it so we're not going to need regulatory orders, because we've got a reasonable system in place where educating and we're teaching towards this system. That's really what this is going to be about, is trying to set out some clear expectations so we can educate and encourage the type of water use that council wants to see. So, and it needs to be seen so that we avoid water shutoffs, etc. So province has been really good with working with us on that. You know, they've never used that as a threat or anything. This has just been, we recognize that that's one of the options that they have available. So.
Great information. Thank you so much. This is bringing some clarity for sure. Yeah, for the policy.
So as far as what would get advanced to council, you're comfortable with the restrictions on lawns? Happy on that?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy with the whole chart at this point.
Okay.
And I'm also happy to look at the potential to tell the public that in our attempt to reduce this consumption on an ongoing basis, depending on our own conditions, that it'll be a lot better to increase our development. We'll have more ability to watch our water consumption.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will go down, maybe not exactly to the average in the province, but because we have bigger lawns and bigger trucks up here and hotter weather. But yeah, I think it all feeds into each other.
The one other item for change is in the surface and power washing, and Linda and I had talked about this and waited back and forth, but I had a call from Public Works last week and I forgot to amend this. If there's a health reason, if there's some bodily fluids or something like that that need to get cleaned from an area, so I do think that we should make some modification to surface and power washing where we say, for health and safety reasons, that we would water there. Because surely if somebody has an accident or throws up in a spirit square or something like that, you want to be able to get out of power washer and clean it up. And I don't think anybody's going to judge us for doing that. So, yeah. We went back and forth on that, but after the real life example, yeah, that's how you would have to do there.
Let's not talk about that. Got one on the bulk water supply here, and as you know, we put the restriction on the citizens, and sometimes it looks like the city isn't following its own guidelines, right? So that's a bit of a challenge too. So the bulk water supply down here, as it gets to level 4, it gets restricted, and then we look at not permitted. And of course, we do have 1 or 2 purchases of bulk water from the city. Is that correct? They'll be aware of what the thing is here, so that we look like we're complying, making sure that we're complying, setting the example, and everything like that. That can be a challenge, right? Sometimes. So.
Yeah.
But that was part of the agreement, that when we had restrictions, that they also had to.
They have to apply.
So to give council information, because I have heard people from the public asking exactly this. So they haven't been using the water for dust control ever since this went to level 4. So that activity's been cut off entirely. The camp itself is not. It is nowhere near full-size operation right now, and many of the folks that are in there are evacuees, so we have been continuing to, we haven't curtailed the camp usage, but again, they're nowhere near full capacity right now, so if that comes up for...
And not watering lawns.
Yeah, for next year, we'll have those conversations, but...
That's the information I've been giving, it's mainly it's internal use.
Yeah, so we've looked at the amounts being used, and it's negligible, and again, given the circumstances, the amount at the camp and the fact that many are evacuees, there hasn't been any curtailment on that side, but we're well aware of it, and if we did progress to a level 5, there probably would be an opportunity for discussions on that front.
So, do we have to have a motion and vote on this in order to bring it to council? Because there's only 2 of us here.
You have a quorum?
We're still required to? Okay.
Are we a quorum?
Yes, you
Yes, we are a quorum. So the recommendation is the council policy review recommendation to council that policy 5.8 outdoor watering conservation policy be approved as amended.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried.
Good.
Right here, it means the rules are in play.
Now I'm a little bit worried. What if Greg's not here?
Well, then we're still
The cat-
They
Yeah,
still get
the rules are
enforced.
still in play with
Yeah.
with it. So we'll now move on to the second item. With the IT policies, and there are 3 of them. So we'll go through the first one first, and one at a time, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, so I've got 3 policies here tonight, so they are all IT related. One of them is on the technology acceptable use, so devices and cell phones and networks and those sort of things, so the acceptable use of city technology. The technology life cycle policy, so how do we determine when we upgrade technology? And then the third-party access. So the thought was just to go through each of them individually here. I can just sort of give a bit of a summary of the policy. It's in its entirety, and then you can jot down some notes and maybe some sections that you have some questions on. Then we can just circle back instead of just trying to hit every point one at a time kind of thing. So the first one here, the technology acceptable use. So generally staff are provided with access to city-owned technology, so devices and networks, so the laptops, the cell phones, and connecting into our city networks and so forth. They also use personal devices at times, and those connect into city networks as well. So what is the acceptable use of our technology and networks by staff being staff and council? So the policy itself, the statement there is what policies must staff and council follow when using city technology. The definitions that I've got here, so I've got staff as any employee or contract employee of the city, which includes elected officials. So that's what, when you go through this, you'll see staff referred to a number of times. Finance and IT, so it refers to the finance and IT department made up of myself, the manager of IT, and the deputy director of finance and IT. So if you see finance and IT, it is generally those 3 individuals. The technology assets, of course, the networks, the systems, the communication devices, and so forth. Personal information is any recorded information that's identifiable to an individual other than what might be publicly available contact information. And FIPA, and I can leave any discussion on FIPA to Greg on that one, but it's the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, British Columbia version, as amended or replaced from time to time. So going through the procedures here, I'll just hit on them. There's about 7 of them. The first one, general use. So basically access to technology is for purposes which, pardon me here, back up one section. General use, yeah, so they are provided to staff for different purposes or permitted access. We've got things in here that they need to be responsible, safe, legal, ethical, consistent with the employee's duties, federal, provincial laws, the city's confidential policy. So basically, when you use the technology, make sure you're abiding by those regulations.
Mr. Anderson,
Yeah.
how do we monitor that? Do we have forms, HR forms on hire?
There are a few forms that are signed on when you do join the city. There's NDA, I think non-disclosure, I think there's confidentiality, unless those 2 are combined into one. There is a communication systems policy, which sort of identifies what you should be accessing and so forth when you're on the internet. We're just looking at that one today. It's pretty specific to certain sites. Yeah, so there's a number of forms that people sign at the point of joining the city that relate to these. Compliance. So when using applications, accessing websites, you need to make sure that you have contacted the manager of IT if you have any doubt with regards to some of the things that you're using within the, while at the city. And you're also prohibited from copying and distributing copyrighted materials. Not necessarily that we have copyrighted materials, but if there are, things that you're downloading or sharing with people. Personal use of city devices.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
when I talk about compliance, I'm sure there are no conflicts with city policies. I don't know why I thought that as a question. We must use approved technology. Is that what we're saying here? And what if, maybe I'm in the wrong section, what if managers say, I want a new GIS system, and you say, doesn't fit with our current whatever?
Yeah, we covered that sort of acceptable standard products and stuff in the technology lifecycle policy. So that's the next one that we're going to look at, sort of talks about city standards. So making sure that...
A classic example for this, Your Worship, would be somebody wants to bring on some form of software that has personal information in it, but that data is domiciled in the United States. That would run contrary to FOIPA. And so this is really just about awareness to make sure that when we're bringing on or utilizing technology, that it is going to be consistent with our legal requirements and city policies. So
legal requirements, I understand, but even with city, we've got a network system in place, but somebody wants to bring in a new program, and I can't even think of an example. But we say it's finance and IT that say yay or nay to whether you want this new program, and it may be that finance has to upgrade or IT has to upgrade their server in order to have this new piece of software.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. We're going to try to address that in the other policy there, but yes, that does happen, that people look at software products and they say, oh, it's only $10 a month. I think I want to download that application and start tracking information. And again, if it is being stored in the US, that can be an issue. So definitely any situation like that, we want them to go through finance and IT and make sure that it is, complying with, FIPA and all of those things, as well as the technology standard, and it's not something that's going to require a lot of support, or at least we understand if it does require support, how much support we're going to have to put towards it and that sort of thing as well. Because we're trying to avoid that. There's a lot of situations where, especially nowadays with technology, there's a lot of neat programs out there, and just takes a credit card to purchase it. So I want to make sure that we're addressing that in the other.
Very easy download.
Yeah, easy to download. Personal use of city devices. So if you are taking a laptop home or using a city-owned cell phone, just identifying that it is a privilege that can be withdrawn, and it should not cost the city anything extra for you to do that. So there are no data charges on your cell phones and so forth. So that's what that point is covering. The use of personal devices on the city network. So if you are connecting your device, making sure that it is authorized and lawful use of our network, and it's not costing, again, the city anything for you to be running your device off of our network.
But there's something about where they have been assigned work and work remotely. Would we not provide tools for our employees if they're working from home?
Yes, Mayor, they likely do have laptops and cell phones, but if there was a situation where they had not been assigned that city device and they have to work remotely, then that was where we said it would be permissible. But I mean, COVID's totally different. I mean, everyone's got devices now that they can take home and use that are generally city devices. So,
Your Worship, I think. Thanks, Your Worship. I think provide a concrete example of how that could come into play. For example, when a lot of us have the option as staff of either having a desktop computer or a laptop computer. I think most of us here have selected a laptop because we need to come down to the chamber and things. But there are staff who have desktop computers. And then when, say, COVID hit, we had to immediately shut down City Hall, and in the space of about 3 weeks, everyone went from everyone being in the office to everyone going home. Sometimes it can take a while to get people in a situation where they have the proper city devices. So this would then cover them during that interim period.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of where I was going.
And those that have personal cell phones that are, again, using it for some form of city work, even though it's not going to be your primary device, it might be, you may have occasion to jump on and do something to be able to facilitate that. So it's really just closing a loophole.
Okay, thank you.
The public records section there just refers to the fact that what you store on the devices is subject to FIPA. The staff responsibility, there's a number of different bullet points here. I'll just go through them in general. That you don't share IDs or passwords. You save use or sharing. What's that? There's safe use or sharing of information. So any of the information that you do possess in the city's network there, that you make sure that you're not sharing that information with others. The respect the privacy of the information, other staff's information. So if somebody's sending you some information, making sure that's not copied or sent on or forwarded on to other parties. Protecting your passwords. So making sure that you're using maybe a password protection software. You're not just writing it on a sticky note on your desk so that you can access the system. So just general common sense there. The storing and sharing of information, so where to store the information, it must be approved. If you have any questions about where you're storing it, then you would ask the manager of IT for different options. So if you needed to take information, put it on a USB or so forth, just making sure that you're aware of what could happen with that.
So there's a number of non-city people that send me information. Am I supposed to? No, I guess I have to recognize where it's from. But once in a while, there are letters from individuals that are sent as attachments. And I don't know who the individual is.
Yeah, that's probably more of a question, I think, for Greg or Sean on the sharing of letters to the mayor and so forth that are in an electronic format. What's your thought on
that? Your Worship, it's always a problem for elected officials in particular because you are going to be getting on your city devices information coming in from outside the city, whereas as staff we can be held to a higher standard of say, interrogating any attachments that we receive. The reality is you will be sent things like doc files and PDFs which can always have embedded in them payloads which can then negatively impact city systems. We would of course ask you to exercise vigilance whenever you're opening any attachments that come to you from outside the city in particular, but I think there'll be a recognition that sometimes unfortunate events are going to happen.
And brings me to the education component. Every now and again I get this little request to do a security education session. I'm assuming all of us do. And there's nothing in here about saying it's necessary to do that. I don't think I have seen it.
That's a current service that we subscribe to. Not to say that we'll always subscribe to that service, but I don't know if we build something like that into the policy, but I mean, education when available, we could have something along those lines that you must participate in that if we do provide it.
I just wish our requests for that didn't look quite so much like phishing attempts.
So one thing that you'll note, and I think Wayne is probably going to speak to this later, but the next three policies really are kind of a unique mix of policy and procedure, which in my personal opinion isn't ideal, because again, what the policy should really be about is what the general principles that are going to be employed. That's what council is wanting to make sure that we have safe and good technology practices in place, and then the specific procedure for how that manifests can change based on what the needs of the organization are, the current best practices, etc. And so I always do get a little bit hesitant when I see kind of specific best practices in policy documents, because they're subject to change. So some of these things you'll note that they're not ever going to change, but some of them have fairly specific references to what looks like procedure. And so that is one of the things that we ultimately are looking for council feedback on. We've heard previously that council likes having everything in one document so you can see policy and procedure. It's easier for you to look at that way. Though admittedly it does make changing that procedure more difficult because you have to go through a formal council process if you wanted to have minor tweaks on the edges. So,
and I think the comments on that particular issue was that we weren't getting procedure at all. It was just the policy we were getting.
Cool.
So we didn't know what procedures were.
Yeah, and that really is, I guess, the challenge when it comes to the hardline policy and procedure approach, because generally speaking, policy is the purview of council and procedure is the purview of governance and staff. And so recognizing that I think some of that was probably born of mistrust and other things previously, and saying, wait, what is our procedure for going about this? And council is wanting, some form of reporting to make sure that proper procedure is being followed on the policy that they are implementing. And so I think that there are some unique ways that other communities have worked to demonstrate to council that procedure is being followed in a host of different areas. Obviously in the financial side that comes up during audit process, but there are other processes as well where we could show that, purchasing policy, etc., that these things are being followed, that there is a procedure in place, even if it is a procedure that can change based on those best practices. So what I think I'm hearing is you like seeing the procedure there so you know what it is?
Not in the policy. I prefer policy just to be policy. And I think before we had questions on procedures and we didn't know what the procedures were. We still don't know a lot of the procedures. And nor do we really need to know. We need to know the outcomes of those. And when the outcomes aren't being delivered, then we have to worry about what the procedure is. But
yeah. So what I can say, let's just take some random strange example. If council were to implement a policy that they always wanted to have a 10% markup on commercial airport fuel sales. That was the council policy. So price it at whatever it is to ensure that it's going to be at 10%. So that would be a council policy that you set down and top-down level. There's not really too much to it than that. What we would then do is go have a procedure for what it looks like. So we are going to get pricing from whoever the individual is on a quarterly basis, and then we're going to go through whatever the system is that we end up using for setting the fuel prices. There might be some information as to how to access that service, etc. Those things are, in my opinion, it's not relevant for council, the public, or anybody else. It's an internal procedure document for how to do a certain thing so that you don't lose institutional knowledge when people go. So we do need to continue to build out procedure. You're not wrong. I think it's a fair criticism that there needs to be more formalization of procedure and not just depending on people who have been here and done it a bunch of times. I just would say that, again, I don't think it's necessary to be in the public-facing document, but that's, again, it's my personal opinion, and there are lots of different opinions on this, on how these are done. So.
okay. Mr. Anderson, did you have that?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, to add to Sean's comments there, I mean, you could probably combine these three policies into one policy and then have the general procedures for IT to ensure that, we're purchasing the assets that are standard, and we are, have a replacement policy, and we've got security and those sort of things. We could have a number of procedures towards IT that could be in multiple procedure documents referring to one policy, or there could be one big procedure document. So let's carry on and review these, but there's probably a better format. So responsible internet usage, there is a city's, or did we miss one there? I think we went through, we missed prohibited applications and subscriptions here. So that one there is relative to the applications that people want to install, that they need to be authorized by finance and IT and meet our standards. So we do refer to standards in this document in one place. And staff are not permitted to use cloud software and web applications that aren't yet approved. Now, the reason why we put that in there is because those applications can be installed by anyone. Doesn't require a manager of IT, doesn't require anyone to be able to do that. You just simply download them and start using them. So when it's not a cloud application, it does require IT to put it onto a device or whatever, right? So that's why we've identified that in that clause. Responsible use of internet as per the communication systems policy, and we did check, there is a policy that was reviewed in 2018 that's fairly straightforward on more so what websites and those sort of things you should or shouldn't be visiting. So it complies to that, and then the confidentiality policy, which is signed at the point of employment. City email is for city business, so what that means is that you're going to use your city account for conducting city business, and vice versa, you're not going to use your personal email account to conduct city business. Those sort of things, goes back and forth on that. Remote access, so there are times, as mentioned, where we are working remotely from home and other places that we can connect in through a communication method like a VPN. So when doing that, we just want to make sure that we are protecting the city's information at that time, and that it is a privilege, and misuse of that is not something that we want to see, obviously, and has to comply with confidentiality policy and with the technology third-party access policy, which is the other one that we're reviewing here today. Shared resources, the fact that shared resources are things like the network printers, or if we're using computers in a room like this that are set up and multiple people are accessing them, you need to treat it as if it was individually assigned to you. Job changes, so if you do go to a new position that requires new technology, that you should be taking that new technology or getting new technology for that position and not just carrying forward what you may have. Doesn't happen a lot, but it would be, I guess, if somebody from Public Works is coming in to work in finance, totally different setup, so they're going to be using new technology and giving up their old. The offboarding, so when somebody does leave, making sure that we've got good procedures. We do have some stuff that we're setting up in an online tracking system there that Christine does, so that it does go automatically to the managers. It goes to IT for making sure that everything is checked off when people are both coming in and leaving the organization. The buyouts, so we call it buyouts here, but I guess basically when people are no longer employed by the city, they are not permitted to retain their city phone numbers or cell phones and laptops and those sort of things, although exceptions can be granted when approved from finance and IT, and they take responsibility for any associated costs. So if they need to purchase those devices or whatever, that sort of thing, we can look at exceptions, but generally you're not permitted to take that stuff with you.
Yeah, it's city-owned, it's not individually owned, but usually there's some kind of potential for an amortized piece of equipment to be purchased by the staff, or
I believe,
depending on the
yeah.
circumstances.
We looked at that option for a previous CAO, and it was more expensive than them buying their own personal device. So yeah, they can. We looked at the amortized value of it. Technology stewardship here, the responsibility of finance and IT. The technology support, so it's provided by finance and IT, generally provided by the manager of IT, but there are things that myself or Sean Strang will provide assistance on as well, not just all falling on Jim's shoulders there. Limits to email and messaging services. It's fairly wide open there, but it could be limited here. So there is email services, messaging services, those sort of things. So we've got the tool for that tools to access those things, they could be restricted or limited or expanded. So we've kind of left that pretty wide open, and things do change, and that's why if it's in a policy and we refer to some technology which 2 years later is not a technology anymore, it's been acquired or renamed, then we got to change the policy to refer to something different. But generally this covers a lot of things.
For 7.2, really tiny thing, but let's cross out provisions and put in provides.
Okay. Providing access to city information. This is more of a situation, let's say somebody was on a long-term leave for another employee or backing up another employee on a long-term leave. That would be providing access to information that that other person may need to be able to carry on with the job. And then we also have a clause in there to support investigations related to violations of city policy. So there is that option as well too, that we'd have access to that information. Asset management. This one here, that we enable devices for asset management. So this is more for remote support. So if you're working from home again or at another location, that IT could actually log into your device and provide support or apply an application or an update at that time. We're not using this to track location per se, but it's more for maintaining those devices. Location tracking limits. So this is where we say that we have the ability to use location tracking, but we're not going to use that to monitor individuals or track individuals. So we can use some of that for service delivery, so things like snow clearing and those sort of things. We have devices on the equipment that Charlie could talk in length about, but it gives us an idea where we've been plowing the streets and those sort of things. So we are using it for that purpose. We're not using it for individual purposes. Exemptions to this policy could be authorized by the manager of IT. It may be granted in a single instance, or it could be for other business reasons. If it's not the manager of IT, it could be a director with the written authority delegated to them by the director of finance and IT. So options where we can put some exemptions on this policy. Violation of this policy may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. So that is the acceptable use policy.
Do you want to speak to this, anyone?
I feel bad because it's first kick in the can of policy review and it is not a riveting policy.
Yeah.
I know I love the water one, it was great.
I'm going to ask for you to move. The Policy Review Committee recommends to Council that Policy 419, Technology Acceptable Use, be approved.
So moved.
And I second that. We've already spoke to it. All in favor? Carried. Opposed? None? Carried. And now we go on to the second policy, the Technology Life Cycle Policy.
Yeah, the technology life cycle policy. So this one's a little lighter than the first one we went through there. So this one should be a little easier to get through here. So it really is with relation to buying, replacing, disposing of our technology assets, or also service contracts that we might have as well. So definitions there, department, we refer to department a number of times. That's a director-led department, so it could be public works, recreation, facilities, those sort of things. Staff, as per the previous policy, staff has the same meaning, finance and IT. Technology goods and services refers to, computers, servers, telephones, network-enabled devices, operational technology, sensors that might be out there. Software, web services, cloud-based applications, online subscription services, and then also consulting services in support of technology is also defined under technology goods and services. City standard means the standard for the technology, goods, and services that has been determined by the Finance and IT Department to be city standard as set out in Section 2. So technology procurement, the purchasing policy is one area that dictates the procurement of technology. That's where we've got certain limits on how much an individual can spend based on their position and what's required for approvals and so forth. And then also this policy here. So the combination of the purchasing policy and this policy determines when and how you can purchase new technology. So there's a need here on the procurement side for a review by finance and IT, which includes credit card purchases, because once again, people can just go and buy stuff easily with a credit card. Before they make that decision, they should come to finance and IT to make sure that that is something that we will support.
Now, this is getting back to the same question that I had before. The senior management team decides to do something. It's finance and IT that can or have the ability to approve or not approve?
Yes, that's correct. We do deal with that a bit before balance technology replacement and costs here. The directors need to plan with finance and IT for any new hardware and software, including licensing. So there needs to be that work done from a director level. So let's say somebody in Charlie's group comes to him and says, hey, great little piece of software here. We want to do work orders. We want to track this in Public Works, and we think it's going to be good. We're going to take all the invoices and we're going to enter it into this new system. Okay, well, Charlie says build a business case for that. Comes up to Charlie, says that sounds like a good idea. Comes over to finance, and we say, well, are we entering those twice, and how are you tracking those? And so, you know, before they make that decision, and I use that example because I've lived in that example before, where somebody wanted to do that. But yeah, they need to build a business case, bring it to their director, and then the director talks to finance and IT, and then, you know, if it is something that makes sense and is within our IT budget and that sort of thing, then we can approve it. And then, of course, if it becomes a major capital purchase, it's got to go through council and a budget process. But for the smaller items, those sort of processes would still be in place.
Yeah. One key point with this as well, it's not just about catching those things that maybe aren't necessary, aren't appropriate. We have a fair bit of software, and sometimes it's just a matter of opening up a module that we aren't currently using, things like that. So if things always come through finance and IT, they know what software we own, we have access to, what the functionality is. Sometimes what's being asked for we already have and we're already paying for. It's just a matter of enabling access and providing some training. So we really are trying to centralize that and minimize the proliferation of new software wherever possible, because it's an expense that adds up, and it's really easy to add on to, and it can get away from you. So I'm really happy with what the team is doing to try better understanding and maximize the functionality of what we have, instead of always looking to add on the hot new bell and whistle that ends up just being one more system you need to log into and update, and it can become a challenge. So yeah.
I mean, the DAT system there, we're stretching that in all different directions, which is good. It's a product that, you know, we can use for multiple purposes, right? Instead of looking at other products, and I know that's happened a few times where people have looked at other products for different tracking, and it's like, well, it could be done in this particular software. So if it's not approved by finance and IT, then there is a potential for the fact that integration may not exist, as we said, or it may be difficult for us to support it. So that's one thing that people need to consider.
Mid-question I am probably refers to the next city standard technology.
Yeah, so finance and IT determines the standard and supports the standard technology. So if we say this is standard and we've got a list, which we don't particularly have a list at this point, but if we have a list of all of the different standard products that we do support, and who within finance and IT may support that for them, and then we will do our best to make sure that those are working. But the review is required. So finance and IT requires us to review any new purchases or retirement of technology as well too. So there are situations where we make decisions on retiring technology because of its cost of upgrading per se, or it doesn't support the hardware that's available today, like the meter reading software we have. We're retiring the old version and upgrading to the new one because it no longer supports the next level of Microsoft.
Councillor Luck's favorite topic.
Yeah. The currently commercial meter reading.
Commercial, I knew that.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew it's commercial.
Yeah.
One day.
Yeah, so as mentioned there, staff will need their director approval and business justification prior to discussing with finance and IT. So before they even come to us with this great new fangled piece of software that they're all excited about, they need to make sure they've got a business case for it. And the other point that we had there is that we would set some role-based standards so that individuals, depending on their role, would have access to different types of software.
Mr. Smith, did you have a?
Yeah, one thing that I want to assure council with is when we're talking about city standards, we don't go out and get like the hottest, newest technology. We need to make sure that the technology is fit for the purpose. We're not buying the bottom of the barrel stuff either. We want it to work well, to have a good lifespan on it. But so when we're talking about setting up a city standard, if somebody comes in and says, all right, new phone, time for me to get an iPhone 12 or whatever. I think we're at 12, maybe we're at 13 or 13S or whatever it is right now. But it's not always the latest and greatest. Oftentimes it's a generation or two back that's on the city standard list that we're purchasing. And so I do want to ensure you and the public as well that we use good technology, but this is not a matter of always buying the best, most expensive technology out there.
Yeah, no, I attest to that. I mean, we do stretch the life of our technology to make sure that we're getting maximum value on the investment. So yeah, no question. Technology replacement and costs. So directors need to plan with us on an annual basis if they want new hardware, software, or licensing. I know we've got some AutoCAD licensing, I think, that we're working on here. So that's gone through the whole process, so we're working on that. But yeah, definitely at the director level, if they need something new, bring that forward to us so we can build that into our annual budget. IT does maintain the budget for the software and hardware acquisitions. So again, section 3.2 there is that we want to extend the life of the technology, so making sure that we use it as long as it continues to meet our standards and provides adequate performance for the city. Hardware, 3.3, hardware useful life. Costs need to be covered in the IT budget, and business cases need to be there for significant investment in new hardware. The mobile devices in 3.4, we generally would like to retain these devices until the end of the contract term. Normally those are like 2 or 3 year terms, and not be swapping them out ahead of term. It's just more cost effective that way. So making sure that we extend the life on those.
Are there 3-year terms now with software? I thought there was some licensing that said we could only do 2-year terms.
Oh, this is for cell phones. So cell phone policies that we buy, we buy a 3-year term for a new phone and we get the phone included. So making sure that we are using them for the full 3 years before, a year into it and you're saying, I want to upgrade to the next technology. That just it's not cost effective to do that. Even though the 13S is out there now, or whatever that phone might be.
I know I'm wrong when I say that.
Yeah, so that's on cell phones specifically. We do mention in the next one there that if they are lost or stolen, the departments may bear the cost of those devices. And any new buildings or new renovations that we do, so for example, the fire hall expansion there, that we build those tech costs into the new builds. So something to consider. If Charlie, you're working on something and you got some technology like water filling stations and those sort of things, that we build that technology in and include that in our planning as well. The monthly data costs on 3.7 there, those are paid by the department. So our our cell phone bills on a departmental basis are coded out to the individual departments, so they pay for their data costs on those. And when somebody does...
Should that just be charged to, or do they actually pay their own?
It gets charged to the department's GL account. So what do we say here?
It's a good point, Your Worship.
You got paid
Yeah,
by
our page, they're paid by, yeah, they're charged too, yeah. The 3.8 there is that we've got pre-approved vendors. We dispose of end-of-life technology in a way that minimizes the impact on the environment. We make sure we erase the data from those devices before we dispose them, obviously. So that's just more of a environmentally friendly clause in here. Data retention and disposition. So when there is no business value, we dispose of the assets. And also if they are no longer required to be held as part of FIPA or statutory data retention requirements. So that's the data on the device in itself, is there is no need to retain that data.
What about historical value? You've only got business value, but there's, at times, there's no business value to holding information, but we do hold it for historical value.
Good point.
I think I just gave Greg a headache.
What I can say is anything that doesn't have personal information, it's not as big of a problem if you're holding it for its historical value. There are statutory requirements if there's personal information involved, but very often we do continue to hold data and information for longer than the retention period if it's got value outside of whatever personal information may be included. So yeah, there's some things that you can't get around, but in general, if it doesn't have value, and we think that historical value would absolutely fall within business value. If there's records that it's information about some 1979 land transaction that you're worried about losing that institutional memory, I think there's lots of times we've run into that where it would be nice to know the exact set of circumstances. So yeah, I actually kind of like how it's drafted because it does give that flexibility, but know that we're not on a vendor to go get rid of every ounce of information that exists, but it is about making sure that the right information is disposed of.
Okay, thanks.
And in 4.2, one of my favorite clauses is the Director of Corporate Services manages retention schedules for data and content and city applications and databases based on the needs of the city.
So you erase it and he's in charge of it.
He's in charge of those schedules. We'll comply with it, but definitely Greg's in charge of those. Where it's an online application or service that we've used, we need to figure out how to retain those records. So if we were no longer using that online service, how do we get that data and how do we retain it? And the 4.4 there covers when somebody does leave, files that have been saved on their devices, and transitory records such as voicemail and chat history will not be retained. Emails and network drives are managed in accordance with the employee offboarding procedures, so making sure that we're cleaning up those network drives where it's not something that we need to retain. Exemptions, again, a similar exemption to the previous policy there, that manager of IT and or director of finance and IT can approve exemptions, and we got to track those exemptions if we do allow them. And the violation, which same clause as the previous policy.
Any comments? So I need a motion that the Policy Review Committee recommend to Council that Policy 420, Technology Life Cycle Policy, be approved.
So moved.
Second, we've already discussed. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried.
Just voting with two people isn't getting old.
Yeah, it is getting old. Feels weird. Okay, so I have a current one here somewhere. Okay.
Okay, so the final one here this evening is the technology third-party access policy. So it's a guideline for providing third-party access to city technology with the goal of reducing the risk of outside parties compromising our IT infrastructure. So definitions here: access. Access means any format and by any means, access to in any format and by any means to city technology, including by on-site visual access, remote access, or by access via an external storage device. Staff, as previously defined, employees, including elected officials. City technology is any city information or data in any format, including that which is stored on any computers, networks, databases, operational systems, or other software or cloud-based systems or servers, and including all proprietary and intellectual property related to such information, data, and software which is owned or controlled by the city or for which the city is responsible under FIPA. So pretty broad, all-encompassing.
Can I ask why in this one, staff, you also include staff that support elected officials? Because I would assume all the
That
others.
was a mistake. We
well.
got rid of that in the other two. We
Oh,
get
okay.
rid of it in this one. It was redundant, that one, yes.
You're perceptive.
Very good catch there, yeah. Third party is any corporate or individual entity, including without limitation any corporation, partnership, individual, society, government agency, or other legal entity which is external to the city and the city's employees. So generally access is prohibited. So basically, as a starting point, we start with no access unless approved by this policy. And then limits to access. So there needs to be verification from the, there needs to be verification confirmation of the following conditions in place, so that there is a written service contract in place, including a confidentiality clause. The second one is the third party has entered into an NDA or confidentiality agreement approved by the Director of Corporate Services. And the third clause is the third party has entered into an information sharing or similar agreement approved by the Director of Finance and IT and the Director of Corporate Services. So those are the three things that we need to verify before providing third-party access. The provisioning access, once it has been authorized, that request needs to go through the manager of IT. So that is what we've got in that clause. Additional policies and procedures. So basically refers to the fact that third parties must comply with our procedures for the use of technology, confidentiality policy, FIPA. So when they are accessing our policies, they're no different than an employee. They are complying with all of the policies that we have in place. Terminating access lays out the fact that we can terminate any time, any reason, without notice. And if there is non-compliance, that should be reported to the Director of Finance and IT immediately, who would then consult the CAO and Director of Corporate Services to any legal or contractual rights to terminate access by the applicable third party. So even though we do say that we can do it at any time for any reason, there is an issue, then that person should contact myself, and then we should make sure that there is reason to terminate. So supervised access is preferred. So if somebody does have access to the system, the ideal scenario is that we are sort of looking over their shoulder, I guess, if you like, whether it's using a tool for screen sharing, and here this technology was written a while ago. WebEx, I don't think is that popular anymore as a tool, but things like ConnectWise are more commonly used. And so basically, the more supervised it is, the better level of security that we have over that third party as they're looking at things or reviewing things. So a lot of times if we're doing support on our main financial application, the third party logs in, and then we are sitting there watching as they are doing, you know, showing us how to do something, and then they log off. So that's kind of right on access there for that. Non-supervised access, where there is a requirement that they are not going to be supervised, that they are using our approved connection methods, so VPN, and the basis for this access, what we say here is it should be the least access possible for the shortest duration. So whatever it is that they need to do, let's make sure they get it done as quickly as they can, using those accesses provided if they are non-supervised.
So people such as auditors who have to come in to our system and dig for information.
Yeah, if that was somebody that we provided it for, that we would give them a window of time where they could go and do that, and then make sure that their access is turned off after that time period. The non-supervised access, so confidentiality, so staff on this one here, that we just need to be vigilant as we monitor any third-party access. We don't disclose confidential information to the third party as we're doing providing the access. We keep our credentials private, so any passwords or IDs, you know, we're not, you know, keying them in with displays on and those sort of things, so that they actually can see what those may be. And it should be only for the intended purpose of what they need to access the system for. They shouldn't go down on another path into other areas where they really didn't need the access. So just making sure that it is focused in that area of concern. Security and data disposal, so city data stays with the city unless authorized, is what this one is saying. And any third-party data that belongs to the city, unless authorized by a contractual agreement, needs to be returned to the city at the end of the contract. So making sure that the information is transferred back to the city if they were able to pull some information down, making sure that we have that information back. They've disposed of any city data from non-city devices, and we have written confirmation from them that they have disposed of that data. And then the final two, the exemptions, again, that one should be the same as the other two policies there, that with direction from manager of IT or
Manager needs another A somewhere.
manger. Okay. Spell check, good. That's one that wouldn't get caught in spell check. Yeah. And then the violation clause as well.
That is French manger. He just consumes IT.
The city manger.
Any comments? Seeing none.
What I see.
I move that the policy review committee recommend to council that policy 421, technology third-party access, be approved.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Should I say something? Oh, sure. Yeah, that looks good.
Opposed, none? Carried.
The hope, Your Worship, and if you want to share this with council when it comes back, but again, I know this has come up with question with Policy Review Committee previously. Once the Policy Review Committee has reviewed it in a great amount of detail, the idea is that at the council level, it's not going to be this type of in-depth review. If any individuals have questions, they can ask those questions. We're happy to answer those. But the staff report will largely be that we went through these policies in detail and invite any questions that council has, just to set that expectation, and you can share that with the rest of the council team so that we'll all be on the same page. Because I do know that sometimes, particularly this was a council ago, it would be done at the Policy Review Committee and you'd have literally a carbon copy of the discussion again, and that.
Yeah, the point of committees.
So, okay, perfect. Just wanted to.
So having said that though, I'm thinking the water one that we talked about, that could go into a little bit more discussion, right? But these ones are, Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that people can't discuss and
Yeah.
ask questions and provide points. That's always in bounds. Just know that we're not going to go through it like this. But for the water one, we recognize there's a lot more probably political interest in that particular policy.
Yeah, so we'll do the little cleanup on the terminology and spelling majors, and then we will get into the next meeting.
Move on. Looks great.
There are no information items, so this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. So you need to go ahead and decide.